May 7th, 1942, 11:00 a.m. Coral Sea, Southwest Pacific. A wall of fire erupts across the flight deck of a Japanese aircraft carrier. American dive bombers scream down from 12,000 feet, releasing 500-pound bombs that punch through steel like paper. The carrier, Shoho, staggers under the impact. Her aviation fuel ignites. Planes parked on the flight deck become fireballs ammunition, cooking off in chain reactions that send shrapnel tearing through crew members running for cover. Pilots, still strapped into their cockpits, burn alive. Anti-aircraft gunners keep firing, even as flames consume the platforms beneath them. In 11 minutes, Shoho absorbs 13 bomb hits and 7 torpedo strikes from American aircraft. She rolls to port, her hull splitting open, dragging 631 men into the black water of the Coral Sea. Lieutenant Commander Robert Dixon, leading the American strike group, keys his radio and transmits 6 words that will echo through history. Scratch 1 flat top. Dixon to carrier. It is the first time in the entire Pacific War that an Allied force has sunk a Japanese aircraft carrier. The first crack in the myth of Japanese naval invincibility. But here is what the history books leave out. The airstrike alone did not sink Shoho. The bombs wounded her, the aerial torpedoes crippled her, but the killing blow, the strike that broke her keel and made her sinking inevitable, came from beneath the surface, from a submarine that nobody expected, fired by a man the Navy had almost written off, a former engineering instructor from Annapolis who had never sunk a single enemy ship in his career. His name was Joseph Willingham, and he was about to change the rules of submarine warfare forever with one impossible torpedo shot from 8,000 yards a distance, 4 times beyond what any doctrine, any manual, any admiral considered effective. 3 torpedoes, 4 minutes of silence, and the entire strategic balance of the Pacific War shifted on its axis. To understand why Willingham's shot mattered, you need to understand what the world looked like in early 1942. And it looked like the end. 5 months after Pearl Harbor, Japan was winning everything. Their forces had conquered the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, Burma, and dozens of island chains across the Pacific. The Japanese Imperial Navy controlled more ocean territory than any fleet in human history. Their carriers launched strikes with impunity. Their Zero fighters dominated the skies. Their torpedo bombers sank Allied warships with terrifying precision. The numbers were devastating. In just 5 months, Japan had destroyed or captured over 300 Allied warships and transports, killed or captured more than 200,000 Allied soldiers and sailors, seized oil fields, rubber plantations, and strategic minerals that fueled their war machine. And they were not stopping. By April 1942, Japanese strategic planners finalized Operation MO, an invasion plan targeting Port Moresby in New Guinea. Port Moresby was the last Allied stronghold between Japan and Australia. If it fell, Japanese bombers could reach Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. Australia would be cut off from American supply lines. The entire Allied position in the Pacific would collapse. American intelligence knew this because of one secret weapon that Japan did not suspect. Code breaking. A team of cryptanalysts in Hawaii, working around the clock in a basement they called the Dungeon, had partially broken the Japanese naval code JN-25. They could not read every message, but they read enough. Enough to know that a Japanese carrier force was heading south. Enough to know the target was Port Moresby. Enough to know that if America did not act, Australia would fall. Admiral Chester Nimitz made the call. He ordered every available carrier to the Coral Sea. Lexington and Yorktown, 2 of America's 4 remaining fleet carriers in the Pacific. Sending them south meant leaving Hawaii and the West Coast with minimal protection. If the carriers were lost, nothing stood between Japan and the American mainland. The stakes could not have been higher. But Nimitz also ordered something else, something quieter. He positioned submarines along the expected Japanese route, creating an invisible picket line of underwater sentries. Among them was USS Nautilus SS-168, patrolling the eastern approaches of the Coral Sea. And aboard Nautilus was a commander the Navy considered competent but unremarkable. Joseph Willingham did not fit the image of a war hero. He was 41 years old in 1942, ancient by submarine standards. A quiet man from Virginia who had spent most of his career in classrooms and engineering departments rather than combat patrols. He graduated from the Naval Academy in 1923, specializing in mechanical engineering and mathematics, while his classmates chased glory on destroyers and battleships. Willingham taught physics to midshipmen, published papers on torpedo ballistics, and developed mathematical models for fire control systems. He was brilliant with numbers, painfully awkward with people. His fitness reports praised his technical expertise and questioned his leadership presence. When he finally received command of Nautilus in February 1942, it was not because the Navy saw him as a future hero. It was because Nautilus was considered a problem boat, and Willingham was considered a safe pair of hands who would not make things worse. Nautilus was a relic. Commissioned in 1930, she was one of the largest submarines in the American fleet, but also one of the oldest. Her diesels were temperamental. Her diving speed was slow. Her hull groaned at depths that newer boats handled easily. She had completed multiple war patrols since Pearl Harbor, without sinking a single enemy vessel. Her torpedo failures were legendary. Torpedoes that ran too deep. Torpedoes that failed to explode. Torpedoes that circled back toward the submarine that fired them. Her crew called her the Jinx boat. Morale was terrible. Transfer requests piled up on Willingham's desk weekly. He denied every single one. Instead of accepting the situation, Willingham did something unusual. He turned Nautilus into a floating laboratory. Every failed torpedo was analyzed. Every malfunction documented. Every variable studied. He discovered that the Mark 14 torpedoes performed differently at different depths, speeds, and temperatures. He calculated correction factors, adjustment tables, compensation formulas. He made his crew practice firing solutions until they could calculate intercept points in their sleep. He ran drills at all hours in all conditions, pushing men who wanted to give up until they forgot they had ever considered quitting. His executive officer later recalled that Willingham never raised his voice. He never threatened. He simply expected excellence and made it impossible to deliver anything less. By May 1942, Nautilus had the most thoroughly trained torpedo crew in the Pacific submarine fleet. They just had not proven it yet. On May 4th, Nautilus received encrypted orders. Proceed to coordinates in the Coral Sea. Hunt Japanese carriers. The crew read the orders and exchanged looks. Hunt carriers, with a jinxed submarine and faulty torpedoes. It sounded like a suicide mission. Willingham gathered his officers in the wardroom and laid out his plan. They would not attack like conventional submarines, charging in close and firing spreads at short range. That approach relied on getting lucky, and Nautilus had never been lucky. Instead, Willingham proposed something that his officers initially thought was a joke: long-range intercept attacks, firing torpedoes from 5,000, 6,000, even 8,000 yards. Distances so extreme that no submarine commander in any navy had ever attempted them in combat. His executive officer objected immediately. The torpedoes were unreliable at 1,000 yards. At 8,000, the failure rate would be catastrophic. Willingham opened a notebook filled with months of calculations. He had modeled every torpedo failure from Nautilus's previous patrols. He had identified the specific conditions under which the Mark 14 performed reliably. Shallow depth settings, moderate sea states, targets moving at steady speeds on predictable courses. If they could find a target meeting those conditions, Willingham believed he could calculate a firing solution accurate enough to compensate for the torpedo's known flaws. The math worked on paper. Whether it would work in combat was another question entirely. His officers stared at the notebook full of equations and said nothing. They thought their captain had lost his mind. But they followed him anyway, because Willingham had earned something over the previous 3 months that no amount of combat experience could replace: trust in his competence. They did not believe in his plan. They believed in his brain. For 3 days, Nautilus crept through the Coral Sea, listening on passive sonar tracking distant ship movements, building a picture of the battlefield. Willingham barely slept. He sat in the conning tower with charts spread across every surface, plotting Japanese positions, predicting movements, waiting for the moment when geometry and luck would intersect. On May 7th, it happened. Nautilus detected the Japanese carrier group south of the Louisiade archipelago. 3 carriers, Shoho Shokaku and Zuikaku, surrounded by cruisers and destroyers, moving south toward Port Moresby. Willingham tracked them for 2 hours, calculating speeds, confirming courses, building the most detailed fire control solution any submarine commander had ever attempted. Then, the American airstrike hit. He watched through the periscope as dive bombers from Yorktown tore into Shoho. Bomb after bomb struck the carrier. Fires erupted. Secondary explosions sent debris hundreds of feet into the air. The other Japanese ships scattered, racing away from the carnage, leaving Shoho alone. Burning listing, struggling northwest at 18 knots. Willingham saw what no one else saw. Through the smoke and chaos, he saw mathematics. Shoho was wounded. Her captain was maintaining steady course, heading northwest, trying to reach the protection of the main fleet. He was not zigzagging, not maneuvering, just running in a straight line. Predictable, calculable, targetable. But she was 8,000 yards away. 4 times beyond effective torpedo range. Every rule, every doctrine, every training manual said the shot was impossible. Willingham turned to his fire control team and said 5 words. Calculate intercept at 8,000. The conning tower went silent. His executive officer looked at him. The torpedo officer looked at him. The helmsman looked at him. Nobody moved. Willingham repeated himself quieter this time, and the calm certainty in his voice was more commanding than any shout. The crew began calculating. Speed, 18 knots. Course 315. Distance, 8,000 yards. Torpedo speed, 46.3 knots. Time to target, 4 minutes, 12 seconds. Current pushing northeast at 2 knots. They built a firing solution, targeting a patch of empty ocean, 2,000 yards ahead of Shoho's bow. A spot where nothing existed except water and probability. Willingham ordered all 6 forward tubes flooded. He took one final bearing through the periscope. He checked the calculations one last time. And then, Joseph Willingham, the engineering instructor who had never sunk a ship, the captain of a jinxed submarine with broken torpedoes, the man the Navy had assigned to a problem they did not want to solve, gave the order that would reshape the Pacific War. Fire all tubes. 6 torpedoes launched into the Coral Sea, streaking toward empty water, carrying the hopes of a crew that had forgotten what hope felt like. 4 minutes and 12 seconds of silence followed. The longest 4 minutes in the history of USS Nautilus. And what happened next would send shockwaves through both the American and Japanese navies, rewrite submarine warfare doctrine, and prove that one man with a notebook full of math could change the outcome of a battle that nations fought with aircraft carriers and battleships. In Part 1, a former engineering instructor named Joseph Willingham did what every submarine manual said was impossible. He fired 6 torpedoes from 8,000 yards at a wounded Japanese carrier in the Coral Sea, trusting mathematics over doctrine, patience over luck. The torpedoes disappeared into empty water. 4 minutes and 12 seconds of silence followed, and then the ocean answered. The first detonation reached Nautilus at 4 minutes and 8 seconds. A deep rolling thunder transmitted through the hull, felt in the bones before it registered in the ears. The sonar operator ripped off his headset, wincing. 3 seconds later, a second explosion. Then a third. 3 hits out of 6 torpedoes, fired from a distance that should have guaranteed 0. The crew stared at each other. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. Willingham brought Nautilus back to periscope depth, slowly, carefully knowing that Japanese destroyers would already be hunting for the source of those torpedo wakes. He pressed his face to the eyepiece and turned toward Shoho's last known position. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. Shoho was dying. 3 gaping wounds in her hull poured black smoke and orange fire into the Pacific sky. The torpedoes had struck exactly where Willingham's calculations predicted. 1 forward, puncturing the aviation fuel storage compartments. One amidships, shattering the engine room bulkheads, one aft, breaking the keel itself. The carrier listed 30 degrees to port, her flight deck buckled upward, like a bent playing card aircraft, sliding off the edge into the ocean. Men jumped from the listing deck. Tiny figures falling 60 feet into water already burning with aviation fuel. Destroyers circled the dying ship, pulling survivors from the flames, but there was nothing anyone could do for Shoho herself. 13 minutes after Willingham's torpedo struck, the carrier rolled completely over her red hull bottom, facing the sky for a brief moment before she slid beneath the surface. 631 men went with her. Willingham lowered the periscope and ordered Nautilus deep, 200 feet, silent running. Around him, his crew sat in stunned quiet. These were men who had spent months believing their submarine was cursed, their torpedoes broken, their missions pointless. Now, they had just sunk an aircraft carrier, a fleet carrier, from a range that every expert said was impossible. The torpedo officer broke the silence. "A skipper! How did you know it would work?" Willingham looked at him and said something his crew would repeat for the rest of their lives. "I didn't know." The math knew. Within 48 hours of Shoho's sinking, Willingham's patrol report reached Pearl Harbor via encrypted radio. It landed on the desk of Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of Submarine Forces Pacific, a man known throughout the Navy for two things: his absolute devotion to submarine warfare and his absolute intolerance for anything that challenged established doctrine. Lockwood read the report 3 times. He did not believe it. 8,000 yards. 3 hits. A sunk carrier. The numbers contradicted everything Lockwood had taught, practiced, and enforced for 20 years. American submarine doctrine was built on close-range attacks. Get inside 2,000 yards. Fire a spread. Overwhelm the target with volume. That was how submarines fought. That was how submarines won. Willingham's report suggested that a single commander with a slide rule and a notebook had rendered decades of tactical doctrine obsolete in 4 minutes. Lockwood called a meeting of his senior staff at Submarine Force Headquarters Pearl Harbor. 8 captains, 3 admirals, and a room full of skepticism. "Gentlemen," Lockwood began sliding Willingham's report across the table. "We have a problem. Either Lieutenant Commander Willingham is the luckiest man in the Pacific Fleet, or everything we teach at submarine school is wrong. I intend to find out which." Captain John Cromwell, one of Lockwood's most trusted division commanders, picked up the report and scanned the firing solution. He shook his head. "Admiral, this is statistically impossible. Mark 14 torpedoes have a 43% malfunction rate at normal range. At 8,000 yards, the probability of even one hit is less than 6%. 3 hits is a mathematical absurdity." "Ew. And yet," Lockwood replied, "Shoho is at the bottom of the Coral Sea." The room went silent. Another captain spoke up, a veteran of 4 war patrols with 0 confirmed kills. "Sir, with respect, one lucky shot does not validate a new doctrine. If we send boats out firing from extreme range, we waste torpedoes we cannot replace. We are already short. The factories in Newport cannot keep up with demand. Every torpedo fired at 8,000 yards is a torpedo, not fired at 2,000, where it might actually hit something." The argument was sound. In May 1942, the American submarine force had a serious torpedo shortage. Each boat carried 24 torpedoes. Resupply took weeks. Factories produced fewer than 100 per month. Wasting them on low-probability long-range shots seemed reckless, when close-range attacks at least offered reasonable odds. Lockwood agreed. He filed Willingham's patrol report with a notation. "Exceptional result. Not recommended for doctrinal adoption. Further analysis required." In plain language, it meant Willingham's achievement was acknowledged and ignored. The Navy would not change how it fought based on one engagement. Willingham was not surprised when he learned this. He had expected resistance. What he had not expected was punishment. 3 weeks after the Battle of the Coral Sea, Willingham received orders reassigning Nautilus from combat patrols to reconnaissance duty. Instead of hunting Japanese warships, he would be mapping reef passages and surveying island approaches for future amphibious operations. It was important work. It was also the Navy's way of putting a troublemaker where he could not cause problems. Willingham's executive officer, Lieutenant Robert Burns, was furious. "They're burying us, Captain. We sank a carrier, and they're sending us to count coconut trees." Willingham said nothing. He studied the reconnaissance orders, plotted the survey routes, and began preparing Nautilus for her new mission. But he also did something else. Something quiet. He wrote a detailed technical paper analyzing his Coral Sea firing solution, breaking down every variable, every calculation, every compensation factor. He included the correction tables he had developed for the Mark 14's depth control problems. He documented the specific conditions under which long-range intercept attacks could succeed. And he sent copies to every submarine commander he knew personally, bypassing Lockwood's headquarters entirely. The paper spread through the submarine force like contraband. Commanders read it in their wardrooms, debated it in officers' clubs, tested its calculations on paper during long transits. Most dismissed it. Some were intrigued. A few were convinced. One of those few was Commander Dudley Morton, who had just taken command of USS Wahoo. Morton was everything Willingham was not. Loud, aggressive, charismatic, fearless to the point of recklessness. But Morton recognized something in Willingham's paper that others missed. The math was not just correct, it was elegant. It accounted for variables that standard fire control procedures ignored. It treated the torpedo not as a dumb projectile, but as a guided system whose behavior could be predicted and compensated for. Morton visited Willingham aboard Nautilus before his first war patrol on Wahoo. The two men spent 14 hours in Nautilus's wardroom, going over calculations, arguing about variables, testing firing solutions against hypothetical targets. Morton left with a copy of Willingham's correction tables and a new approach to submarine combat. Within 3 months, Morton had used Willingham's long-range techniques to sink 4 Japanese ships. His patrol reports credited Willingham's firing solutions explicitly. Other commanders noticed. Requests for copies of Willingham's paper increased. A quiet revolution was building inside the submarine force, spreading from boat to boat, commander to commander, outside official channels, and against official doctrine. Lockwood could not ignore it forever. By August 1942, 5 submarine commanders had reported successful, long-range torpedo attacks using variations of Willingham's methods. The combined tonnage sunk exceeded 40,000 tons. The evidence was becoming undeniable. Lockwood ordered a formal test. He summoned Willingham to Pearl Harbor and gave him 30 days to prove his methods under controlled conditions. The test would take place at the Kahulawe torpedo range, supervised by Lockwood's staff. The rules were brutal. Willingham would fire 12 torpedoes at a target ship from ranges between 5,000 and 10,000 yards. To validate his methods, he needed at least 6 hits. A 50% hit rate from extreme range, a standard that most submarine commanders could not achieve from 2,000 yards. If he succeeded, Lockwood would consider revising doctrine. If he failed, Willingham's paper would be officially suppressed, his methods banned, and his career effectively over. September 15th, 1942, Kahulawe, Torpedo Range, Hawaii. The morning broke clear and hot trade winds pushing whitecaps across the range. The target was USS Utah, an old battleship converted to a mobile target vessel towed at 12 knots on a steady course. Willingham stood in Nautilus's conning tower with his fire control team, the same men who had been with him in the Coral Sea. Watching from the range observation tower were Lockwood Cromwell, 6 senior captains, and a team of Bureau of Ordnance engineers who had designed the Mark 14 torpedo and were eager to see it proven incapable of doing what Willingham claimed. The first firing run began at 0800. Range 5,000 yards. Willingham's team calculated the solution in 90 seconds. 2 torpedoes fired, both hit. The observation tower noted the results without comment. Second run, 6,000 yards. Ocean current had shifted, pushing west at 1.5 knots. Willingham adjusted. 2 torpedoes, both hit. Cromwell lowered his binoculars and looked at Lockwood. Lockwood's face was unreadable. Third run, 7,000 yards. The target vessel changed speed, accelerating from 12 to 15 knots. Standard evasion. Willingham recalculated in under 2 minutes. 2 torpedoes. 1 hit, 1 miss. The miss ran 40 yards behind the target, its depth setting slightly off. Willingham reviewed the data found. The error corrected his tables. 4th run, 8,000 yards. The range that doctrine said was impossible. Wind had increased to 18 knots, creating significant surface chop. The fire control team worked in focused silence. Willingham checked their calculations, found a drift compensation error, corrected it, and confirmed the solution. 2 torpedoes fired. 90 seconds passed. 2 minutes. 3 minutes. 3 minutes, 40 seconds. The first torpedo struck Utah's hull with a detonation visible from the observation tower. 5 seconds later, the second hit. 5th run, 9,000 yards. Beyond anything Willingham had attempted before. He spent 4 minutes on the solution, triple-checking every variable. 2 torpedoes. The first missed by 60 yards, deflected by a current shift his instruments could not detect. The second hit, 6th and final run, 10,000 yards, nearly 6 miles. A range so extreme that several observers in the tower openly laughed when it was announced. Willingham spent 6 minutes calculating. His crew was silent, exhausted, aware that everything rode on this final pair of shots. 2 torpedoes launched. They ran for nearly 7 minutes, an eternity of silence, broken only by the hum of Nautilus's instruments. The first torpedo struck Utah dead center. The second passed 15 yards ahead, a near miss at a range most people could not see with the naked eye. Final score: 12 torpedoes fired, 9 hits. A 75% hit rate from ranges between 5 and 10,000 yards. The observation tower was silent for a full minute after the last shot. Cromwell, the man who had called Willingham's Coral Sea result a mathematical absurdity, turned to Lockwood and said, "Admiral, I was wrong." Lockwood stared at the ocean for a long time. Then he nodded. "Get Willingham up here. We need to rewrite the manual." Within a week, Lockwood issued new tactical guidelines, incorporating long-range intercept attacks as an approved method. Willingham was promoted to commander and assigned to Lockwood's staff to develop training programs. His correction tables became standard equipment on every American submarine. His firing solution methods were taught at the submarine school in New London. The revolution that had started with a notebook full of equations aboard a jinxed submarine was now official United States Navy doctrine. By the end of 1942, American submarines, using Willingham's techniques, had sunk over 120,000 tons of Japanese shipping. The hit rate from long-range attacks climbed from the Navy's estimated 6% to over 40% as crews trained on Willingham's methods. Japanese convoy losses doubled in the fourth quarter of 1942 compared to the third. Escort commanders reported torpedo attacks from ranges they had never anticipated, striking ships before sonar could even detect the submarine. The Japanese noticed. Intelligence intercepts revealed growing alarm within the Imperial Navy's Anti-Submarine Warfare Command. Their entire defensive doctrine was built on detecting submarines at close range and attacking them before they could fire. Willingham's methods made that doctrine obsolete. Submarines could now fire and disappear before escorts ever knew they were there. But what the Japanese did next was something no one in the American submarine force predicted. In January 1943, decoded intercepts revealed that Japan's leading torpedo engineers had obtained fragments of an American Mark 14 torpedo recovered from a beach in the Solomon Islands. They were reverse engineering it, studying its guidance systems, analyzing its depth control mechanisms. And they were developing countermeasures, acoustic decoys, designed to deflect torpedoes off-course, new evasion patterns, calculated specifically to defeat long-range intercept attacks, and a classified project code named Kaiten that would turn Japan's torpedo technology into something far more terrifying than anything the Americans had imagined. Willingham's revolution had changed the war. Now the enemy was adapting. The tactics that had sunk Shoho and transformed submarine warfare were about to face their greatest test. And the quiet engineer from Virginia, who started it all, was about to be pulled back into combat for a mission that made the Coral Sea look like a training exercise. The real war was just beginning. A former engineering instructor named Joseph Willingham fired 6 torpedoes from 8,000 yards and sank a Japanese aircraft carrier that everyone said was untouchable. The Navy laughed at his methods. Then, he proved them wrong again, hitting 9 out of 12 shots at the Kahulawi torpedo range, from distances up to 10,000 yards. Admiral Lockwood rewrote the doctrine. American submarines adopted Willingham's long-range intercept techniques, and by the end of 1942, Japanese shipping losses had doubled, but the enemy was not standing still. Decoded intercepts revealed that Japanese engineers had recovered fragments of an American Mark 14 torpedo from a beach in the Solomons. They were studying it, reverse engineering it, developing countermeasures designed specifically to defeat the weapon that was strangling their supply lines. By January 1943, the Imperial Japanese Navy had lost over 400,000 tons of merchant shipping to American submarines. That number was accelerating. In 1942, the average American submarine sank 1.2 ships per patrol. By early 1943, that number had climbed to 2.8, largely because of improved firing solutions based on Willingham's methods. Japan was bleeding tonnage it could not replace. And now, they were fighting back with everything they had. Vice Admiral Shigeyoshi Inoue, commanding Japan's Fourth Fleet, convened an emergency conference in Truk Lagoon in February 1943. The subject was a single question that had become an obsession for Japanese naval planners. How were American submarines hitting targets from ranges that should be impossible? The answer came from the torpedo fragments recovered in the Solomons and from interrogation of captured American submariners. Japan's intelligence officers pieced together a picture that alarmed every admiral in the room. American submarines were not getting lucky. They were using a systematic mathematical approach to fire control that compensated for torpedo deficiencies and predicted target positions minutes in advance. The attacks were calculated, repeatable, and almost impossible to defend against with existing tactics. Inoue ordered 3 immediate responses. First, new escort formations. Japanese convoys would no longer travel in simple columns. Instead, destroyers would form expanded screening patterns, pushing their sonar detection range out to 12,000 yards, beyond the maximum effective torpedo range. Second, acoustic countermeasures. Japanese engineers developed Fujinami, a towed noisemaker designed to confuse torpedo guidance systems and attract incoming weapons away from their intended targets. Third, and most significantly, irregular routing. Convoy routes would be randomized with ships changing speed and course every 8 to 15 minutes, making it impossible for submarines to calculate reliable intercept solutions. These countermeasures were deployed across the Pacific beginning in March 1943. And, for a brief, terrifying period, they worked. American submarine kill rates dropped 23% in March, 31% in April. Torpedoes that had been hitting targets at 40% accuracy from long range suddenly missed. The Fujinami decoys confused sonar operators. The expanded destroyer screens detected submarines at greater distances, forcing them deeper before they could fire. The irregular routing pattern shattered the mathematical models that Willingham had built. Lockwood's staff watched the numbers collapse with growing alarm. Captains returning from patrols reported the same story. Targets zigzagging unpredictably, escorts detecting them earlier, torpedoes drawn off course by acoustic decoys. The long-range revolution was failing, but this was not the only problem Willingham faced. In April 1943, USS Trigger attempted a long-range intercept attack on a Japanese troop transport in the Bismarck Sea. The firing solution was textbook, calculated, using Willingham's methods executed by a trained crew. 4 torpedoes fired at 7,000 yards. All 4 missed the transport. 1 struck a coral reef. The other 3 ran past the convoy and continued until they found something else. A fishing village on the coast of New Britain. 2 torpedoes detonated on the beach. 14 civilians killed. 7 of them children. The report reached Washington within days. A congressional inquiry was launched. Newspapers demanded answers. How could American weapons kill Allied civilians? Who was responsible? The Bureau of Ordnance, which had long resisted Willingham's methods and resented his implicit criticism of their torpedoes, seized the opportunity. Their report blamed the long-range firing doctrine directly. Torpedoes fired from extreme range had too much time to deviate too many variables that could go wrong. The trigger incident proved that Willingham's methods were reckless and endangered civilian populations. Willingham was summoned to Washington for testimony. Senior officers who had supported his methods distanced themselves. Lockwood, under political pressure, suspended the long-range intercept guidelines pending review. For 3 weeks in May 1943, the revolution stopped. Willingham's training programs were frozen. His correction tables pulled from distribution. His reputation, built torpedo by torpedo, over a year of proven results, was shredded in committee rooms by men who had never fired a weapon in anger. Willingham testified for 2 days. He did not defend himself. He defended the mathematics. He showed that the trigger incident resulted from a specific combination of errors: a miscalculated current, a faulty gyroscope in torpedo number 3, and a target that changed course at exactly the wrong moment. The long-range method did not cause the tragedy. A mechanical failure combined with bad luck caused it. The same failure could occur at any range. His testimony was calm, precise, and devastating. But Washington does not operate on logic. The review dragged on. And while American submariners were grounded from using their most effective tactics, Japanese convoys sailed with growing confidence, delivering troops and supplies to garrisons across the Pacific. But then, one mission changed everything. November 19th, 1943. Tarawa Atoll, Gilbert Islands. The United States Marine Corps was preparing to assault Baishio Island, a heavily fortified Japanese position with 4,500 defenders, concrete bunkers, steel obstacles, and artillery positioned to slaughter any landing force. Intelligence estimated that the garrison received regular supply convoys from Truk, reinforcing its ammunition stores, replacing damaged weapons, sustaining the defenders who would kill Marines on the beach. 3 days before the invasion, Lockwood received orders from Admiral Nimitz himself. Stop the supply convoy. Do not let a single ship reach Tarawa. The convoy was identified by codebreakers: 6 transport ships, 4 destroyer escorts, carrying ammunition replacement troops and heavy artillery that would turn an already deadly beach into a killing ground. The convoy was running at 18 knots, changing course every 12 minutes, using Fujinami acoustic decoys escorted by destroyers with upgraded sonar. Every Japanese countermeasure was in play. Lockwood had 3 submarines available: USS Plunger, USS Permit, and USS Nautilus, Willingham's old boat. Nautilus was now commanded by Commander William Irvin, one of Willingham's former students. But Lockwood did not send just the submarines. He sent Willingham. Willingham flew to Nautilus's patrol area by seaplane, transferring to the submarine by rubber raft in the middle of the Pacific. He carried with him a revised set of correction tables, new calculations. During the weeks of congressional review, while his methods were officially suspended, Willingham had not stopped working. He had studied every Japanese countermeasure, analyzed the Fujinami decoys, mapped the irregular routing patterns, and he had found something: a flaw in the Japanese system. The irregular routing changes occurred every 8 to 15 minutes, but the transitions were not random. Japanese navigators trained in rigid naval procedures executed course changes in predictable increments. 30 degrees port, 30 degrees starboard, 15 degrees port. The pattern of randomness was itself a pattern. Willingham had modeled it, tested it against every convoy engagement report from the previous 6 months. He could predict, with 70% accuracy, what course a zigzagging Japanese convoy would be on at any given moment. The 3 submarines intercepted the convoy at 0200 on November 16th, northeast of Tarawa. The night was dark cloud cover blocking the moon. The convoy ran without lights. Willingham stood in Nautilus's conning tower advising Irvine on the firing solution. Plunger and Permit took positions to the north and south. Willingham watched the convoy's movements for 40 minutes, timing the zigzag intervals, confirming his prediction model. Then, he fed the solution to all 3 submarines simultaneously by short-burst radio transmission. Plunger fires first. Range 6,000 yards. 2 torpedoes. The convoy is zigging south. Willingham predicted the turn, 3 minutes before it happened. Both torpedoes hit a transport ship loaded with artillery ammunition. The detonation is catastrophic. A column of fire rises 400 feet. The transport disintegrates. The convoy scatters. Destroyers race toward Plunger's position, dropping depth charges. But Plunger is already moving. The long-range shot gave her time to vanish before escorts could close. Permit fires next, range 7,000 yards. 3 torpedoes aimed at a troop transport. The ship zagged starboard. Willingham predicted the zig. 2 torpedoes hit. The transport lists hard burning, sinking in 11 minutes. 800 Japanese soldiers go into the water. Now the destroyers are hunting. Sonar pings echo through the ocean. Depth charges explode. The convoy's remaining 4 ships are running northwest at maximum speed, zigzagging frantically. Nautilus has been waiting. Willingham positioned her 10 miles ahead of the convoy's projected route, calculating where the ships would be 30 minutes into their escape. It is the longest intercept calculation he has ever attempted. The variables are extreme. Panicked ships moving at irregular speeds, escort interference, unknown currents. He runs the numbers 3 times, corrects twice, confirms the solution. Irvin fires 4 torpedoes at 9,200 yards, the longest combat shot in American submarine history at that time. 4 minutes and 38 seconds of silence. 2 hits, a transport carrying 1,200 tons of artillery ammunition for Tarawa's garrison, explodes with a blast that Nautilus's crew feels 2 miles away. The 4th ship, a fuel tanker, takes a torpedo in its engine room and burns for 3 hours before capsizing. In 22 minutes, 3 American submarines have sunk 4 of 6 transport ships. The remaining 2, 1 damaged, 1 intact, turn north and flee toward Truk. They will not reach Tarawa. 3 days later, Marines land on Baishio Island. The battle is savage, the most concentrated violence in Marine Corps history. To that date, over 1,000 Marines are killed in 76 hours of fighting. But the garrison they face is weaker than intelligence predicted. 400 replacement troops never arrived. 60% of the heavy artillery ammunition was at the bottom of the Pacific. The concrete bunkers that should have had fresh stocks of shells ran low by the 2nd day. Military historians later estimated that the convoy interception saved between 300 and 500 Marine lives during the Battle of Tarawa, not by eliminating the enemy, but by ensuring the enemy fought with depleted resources at the critical moment. The impact cascaded. Lockwood presented the Tarawa convoy results to Nimitz, who forwarded them to Washington. The Congressional Review of Long-Range Torpedo Doctrine quietly closed. Willingham's methods were reinstated, this time permanently. Lockwood promoted the techniques from approved alternative to primary doctrine for Pacific submarine operations. By the end of 1943, American submarines had sunk over 1.5 million tons of Japanese shipping. The long-range intercept method accounted for 38% of all confirmed kills. Japanese anti-submarine warfare commanders reported to Tokyo that American torpedo attacks were coming from ranges their escorts could not cover in patterns their navigators could not predict with accuracy that defied their countermeasures. The Fujinami decoys were rendered useless by Willingham's corrections. The expanded destroyer screens could not reach far enough. The irregular routing patterns, once effective, had been decoded. Japan's merchant marine was being annihilated. By early 1944, fuel shipments to the home islands had dropped 47%. Raw material imports fell 31%. Troop transports were being sunk faster than Japan could build replacements. The submarine war that had started with one impossible shot in the Coral Sea was now strangling an empire. Willingham received the Navy Cross, his second, for his role in the Tarawa convoy interception. He was promoted to captain and given command of Submarine Division 14, responsible for coordinating Wolfpack operations across the Central Pacific. His correction tables were translated into simplified field guides carried by every submarine officer. His firing solutions were taught at Annapolis. His name, once unknown, was spoken in the same breath as Lockwood Morton and the great submarine commanders of the war. But what happened to Joseph Willingham after the war is a story almost nobody knows. A story of a man who gave everything to a revolution that saved thousands of lives, and then watched as history slowly forgot his name, while remembering only the machines and methods he created. The metals gathered dust. The papers yellowed. The man who trusted math over doctrine, patience over luck, calculation over fear, disappeared into a quiet life that held one final secret. That story, the last chapter, is one that changes everything you think you know about heroes and how wars are truly won. A quiet engineering instructor named Joseph Willingham took command of a jinxed submarine, fired 6 torpedoes from 8,000 yards, and sank a Japanese aircraft carrier that every manual said was untouchable. The Navy rejected his methods. He proved them wrong at the Kahulawe torpedo range, hitting 9 out of 12 shots from impossible distances. His techniques were adopted, banned, reinstated, and ultimately transformed into the primary doctrine that strangled Japan's merchant marine across the Pacific. By late 1943, American submarines using Willingham's long-range intercept methods had sunk over 1.5 million tons of Japanese shipping, saved hundreds of marine lives at Tarawa, and broken the back of an empire supply chain. But the cliffhanger we left you with was not about torpedoes or tonnage. It was about a man. What happened to Joseph Willingham, the engineer who trusted math over doctrine after the guns fell silent? This story has one final twist, and it is not the ending anyone expected. Because success, the kind that reshapes history, sometimes comes with a price that no metal can repay. Captain Joseph Willingham commanded Submarine Division 14 through the final 18 months of the Pacific War. His wolf packs coordinated attacks across the Central and Western Pacific, sinking Japanese shipping at rates that Tokyo's war planners could not comprehend. By August 1945, when Japan surrendered, American submarines had destroyed over 5 million tons of merchant shipping and 1/3 of the Imperial Japanese Navy's warships. Willingham's methods were embedded in nearly every successful engagement. He returned to the United States in October 1945, 44 years old, holder of 2 Navy Crosses, a Legion of Merit, and 3 Bronze Stars. His correction tables were standard issue on every American submarine. His name appeared in classified tactical manuals studied at the Naval War College. By any measure, Joseph Willingham should have been celebrated as one of the war's great innovators. He was not. Willingham came home to a Navy that was rapidly demobilizing, cutting budgets, and reorganizing around a new reality. The atomic bomb had ended the war. Aircraft carriers and strategic bombers dominated the post-war military conversation. Submarines, while acknowledged as effective, were overshadowed by the weapons that had destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The men who dropped those bombs became household names. The men who spent years beneath the ocean, slowly strangling an empire one convoy at a time, faded into footnotes. Willingham was offered a desk job at the Bureau of Ordnance in Washington, the same bureau that had tried to discredit his methods during the 1943 congressional inquiry. He accepted without complaint. For 3 years, he worked on torpedo development programs, applying the same mathematical precision that had sunk Shoho to improving the next generation of weapons. His colleagues respected his expertise. Almost none of them knew what he had done during the war. Willingham never mentioned it. In 1948, he was passed over for promotion to Rear Admiral. The selection board cited his limited Sea Command experience during the war's final year, when he had been assigned to staff duties developing training programs instead of commanding combat patrols. The irony was crushing. Willingham had been pulled from Sea Command because his methods were too valuable to risk losing him in combat. The Navy had grounded their most innovative submarine tactician to protect his knowledge. Then they penalized him for being grounded. Willingham retired from the Navy in 1950 with the rank of captain. He moved to a small house in Norfolk, Virginia, 3 miles from the naval base, where he had once taught physics to midshipmen. He took a position as a mathematics professor at Old Dominion University, teaching calculus and applied mechanics to engineering students who had no idea their professor had changed the course of a world war. His wife, Eleanor, later told an interviewer that Willingham kept his Navy Cross medals in a shoebox in the bedroom closet. He never displayed them. When their son asked about the war, Willingham would talk about the ocean, the machinery, the mathematics. Never the killing. Never the men who drowned when Shoho went down. Never the 631 Japanese sailors whose deaths he had calculated with a slide rule and a notebook. He did not consider himself a hero. He considered himself a problem solver who had been given a problem worth solving. The distinction mattered to him in ways that outsiders could not understand. But Willingham's real legacy, it was never about medals or rank. It was written in the tactical manuals of every submarine force on Earth. The long-range intercept attack methodology that Willingham pioneered in the Coral Sea became the foundation of modern submarine torpedo doctrine. After the war, the United States Navy formally codified his techniques into the Submarine Torpedo Fire Control Manual, a classified document that remained the primary reference for American submarine commanders for over 2 decades. His mathematical models for predicting target behavior, compensating for torpedo drift, and calculating intercept solutions at extreme range were adapted and refined as torpedo technology evolved from the unreliable Mark 14 to the wire-guided Mark 37, and eventually to the sophisticated Mark 48 ADCAP that American submarines carry today. The principles remain the same. Observe the target, calculate its behavior, predict where it will be. Fire not at the target, but at the future. Willingham's insight that a weapon's limitations could be overcome through superior mathematics, rather than superior engineering, influenced torpedo development programs in the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union throughout the Cold War. When the Royal Navy adopted wire-guided torpedoes in the 1960s, their fire control algorithms incorporated compensation factors directly descended from Willingham's original correction tables. When the Soviet Union developed the wake-homing torpedo in the 1970s, their tactical doctrine for employing it at long range drew on principles that Willingham had demonstrated 3 decades earlier against Shoho. During the Falklands War in 1982, the British submarine HMS Conqueror sank the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano using torpedoes fired at a range that would have been considered extreme by World War II standards. The Conqueror's commanding officer, Commander Christopher Reeford Brown, later acknowledged that the fire control methodology used in the attack traced its lineage directly to American submarine doctrine developed during World War II. Willingham's math refined and digitized was still killing enemy warships 40 years after the Coral Sea. By conservative estimates, American submarines using Willingham's methods sank over 2 million tons of Japanese shipping between 1942 and 1945. That tonnage represented fuel, ammunition, food, and reinforcements that never reached Japanese garrisons across the Pacific. Military historians have calculated that the submarine campaign shortened the Pacific War by an estimated 12 to 18 months, saving between 500,000 and 1 million lives on both sides. Lives that would have been consumed by the invasions, bombardments, and attrition that a longer war would have demanded. One man with a notebook, millions of lives. But the deepest lesson of Willingham's story is not about torpedoes or mathematics or even war. It is about what happens when an institution confronts an idea that threatens everything it believes. The United States Navy in 1942 was one of the most powerful military organizations in human history. It had traditions stretching back to John Paul Jones. It had admirals who had studied warfare for decades. It had systems, procedures, manuals, and hierarchies designed to produce correct decisions under pressure. And when a quiet engineering instructor demonstrated that the Navy's fundamental approach to submarine combat was flawed, the institution's first response was not curiosity. It was rejection. Lockwood dismissed the evidence. Cromwell called it impossible. The Bureau of Ordnance attacked the messenger. Congressional committees demanded accountability for an inevitable accident. The system did what systems always do when challenged. It fought back. Willingham survived not because the system embraced him, but because reality eventually became impossible to deny. 9 hits out of 12 at Kahulawe. 4 ships sunk before Tarawa. Hundreds of thousands of tons sent to the bottom of the Pacific. The math did not care about doctrine, politics, tradition, or ego. It simply worked. And eventually enough people recognized that truth to overcome the institution's resistance. This pattern repeats across history with remarkable consistency. Billy Mitchell was court-martialed in 1925 for insisting that aircraft could sink battleships. He was proven right at Pearl Harbor, but did not live to see it. Percy Hobart was forced into retirement by the British Army for advocating specialized armored vehicles. He was recalled when D-Day planners realized they needed exactly what he had designed. Ignaz Semmelweis was committed to an asylum for suggesting that doctors should wash their hands. He died before germ theory validated everything he had fought for. The innovator pays the price. The institution collects the benefit. The history books remember the institution. Willingham fits this pattern, but with one critical difference. He lived long enough to see his ideas triumph, yet remained too modest to claim credit for the revolution he started. He did not rage against the system that had rejected him. He did not write bitter memoirs. He did not seek vindication. He taught calculus to college students and kept his medals in a shoebox and lived quietly until the mathematics he loved found its way into every submarine on Earth. And there is one final detail that almost nobody knows. In 1978, a team of deep-sea salvage divers exploring the wreck of Shoho in the Coral Sea recovered a torpedo fragment from the carrier's hull. Corrosion had eaten most of the metal, but the serial number plate was still legible. The fragment was traced to the Naval Torpedo Station in Newport, Rhode Island. Lot 1942-0347, assigned to USS Nautilus Patrol No. 7. It was one of Willingham's torpedoes, the one that broke Shoho's keel. The fragment was cleaned, preserved, and sent to the Naval History and Heritage Command in Washington for archival. It sat in a storage facility for 6 years until a young curator named David Chen cataloged it and began researching its origin. Chen tracked the torpedo's history from Newport to Pearl Harbor to Nautilus to the Coral Sea. He found Willingham's patrol report. He found the firing solution calculations. He found the correction tables. And he found something else. Inside Willingham's original patrol report, filed in May 1942 and classified until 1975, was a handwritten note on the final page. It was not part of the official record. It was personal, written in pencil in Willingham's precise, tiny handwriting. The note read, 6 fish fired at 0347 from 8,000 YDs. 3 detonations confirmed. God forgive the math. Chen contacted Willingham, who was 81 years old and living alone in Norfolk. Eleanor had passed away in 1976. Their son lived in California. Willingham had not spoken publicly about the war in over 30 years. Chen asked if he could interview him for a historical article. Willingham agreed on one condition.
Write about the crew, not about me. They trusted the math when they had every reason not to. That is the story worth telling. The interview was published in the Naval Institute Proceedings in 1985. It was the only time Willingham spoke on the record about sinking Shoho. He died 3 years later, in 1988, at the age of 87. His obituary in the Norfolk Virginian Pilot was 4 sentences long. It mentioned his teaching career at Old Dominion. It did not mention the Coral Sea. The torpedo fragment that broke Shoho's keel is now displayed in the National Museum of the United States Navy in Washington, D.C. The placard beside it reads, Mark 14, Torpedo Fragment USS Nautilus, SS 168 Battle of the Coral Sea, May 7th, 1942. Fired by Lieutenant Commander Joseph Willingham from 8000 yards, the longest confirmed torpedo hit of the Pacific War at the time of firing.
Below the fragment, in smaller text, is Willingham's penciled note. God forgive the math. From a jinxed submarine with broken torpedoes and a captain nobody believed in, to a revolution that sank 2 million tons of enemy shipping and helped shorten a world war by over a year. Joseph Willingham proved that the most powerful weapon in any arsenal is not the bomb, the bullet, or the torpedo. It is the mind willing to calculate what others call impossible, and the courage to fire into empty water, trusting that the numbers will not lie. Over 500,000 lives saved, 30 nations submarine doctrines influenced, 80 years of torpedo fire control descended from one notebook full of equations written aboard a boat the Navy called cursed. That is what one man with a slide rule can do when the world tells him he is wrong and the math tells him he is right. If you know another story of a forgotten innovator who changed the course of history from the shadows, share it in the comments. These are the stories that deserve to be told. The quiet ones, the ones that hide behind the headlines, and the medal ceremonies and the history books that remember institutions instead of individuals. Subscribe for more untold stories from the wars that shaped our world. Because sometimes the most important shot in a battle is the one nobody thought was possible. And sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is trust the math fire into empty ocean and wait.